So I think in, respect of everyone's time, we could probably go ahead and get started then, if that's all right with y'all. Okay, I know that the first item on our agenda is roll call, but I believe that should be a mistake and just a call to order and going around and introducing ourselves, because we would not need a call roll. My name is Marissa Webb. I'm the Continuum of Care Coordinator within the Office of Homelessness Prevention and Intervention, and Jeff, the manager, is not with us today. And so I will just be leading this meeting, and I'll just pass it to whomever.
Christina Ellison, Director of Programs with New Beginnings Bluegrass.
Angel Talley, and I'm with Volunteers of America.
Janice James, I'm with the HPI board, and they sent me the Wi-Fi. I'll send it to you in a text.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
If anybody else wants it, let me know.
I'm right here.
Huh?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Maybe
And
I'll walk over
I'm
and show you.
Sherry Baptiste, Salvation Army.
I'm Allison Hoffman with Greenhouse 17, Housing Coordinator. I'm Diane Fleet with Greenhouse 17.
I'm Bo Revelet with the HPI board.
All right, thank you all for being here. I know it's fall break, so I appreciate it. We have a pretty light agenda, but the next item on it is the approval of meeting minutes. Those meeting minutes were included in your packet from August 2nd, earlier this year. Are there any corrections, comments that need to be made? I also have a physical copy of the agenda if anyone needs it to review. Okay, well that would be a full continuum vote. So anyone could make a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Are there any opposed? Everyone in favor?
Aye.
All right, wonderful. Moving on to new business, we do not have anything within new business. Our COC application was due last week, a day before this packet went out, so we were very much in our COC headspace. But we do have some in continuing business, so moving on to that. The first item is our returns to homelessness review. Dylan informed me that he is feeling under the weather today, so we're sending good vibes his way, and we'll continue on to the housing triage system report. That report should be in your packet. But I also know that those numbers are a little difficult to conceptualize and really think about. So I also made a little presentation as well with those numbers. Something to keep in mind concerning this report is it is based upon the calendar year. And because of the way that the calendar year falls and that these meeting packets have to come out a week in advance, we are missing like 2 days of September, working business days of September when this packet went out. So I apologize, it's not the entire quarter, it's minus 2 days, but none of the actual materials, information should have been affected. So just starting off with the number of referrals that were made each month in this quarter, there were 25 referrals in total, with the majority being in August, 13 in August, 9 in July, and 3 in September. To put it in perspective, this is our quarter, July, August, September, based upon the entire year so far. So you can see that June is very similar to September, where we only had 3, but the majority seems to be pretty steady within that like 10-ish range. Each color dot, each dot represents a referral. Each color dot represents the program referred to. For example, dark blue is Arbor's ESG Rapid Rehousing. DBBI with Community Action Council is this purple color, etc. So once again, breaking it down by this quarter and month, where did we have the most referrals to? We had 7 referrals to Community Action Council's DBBI program, 2 referrals to CIC's Project Independence, 2 to their TZ program, that's their transitional housing, rapid rehousing program, in partnership with Arbor. 2 to Lexington Housing Authority Shelters Plus Care, 2 to Mount Combs PSH, 6 to Mount Combs Rapid Rehousing, and 4 to New Beginnings. Something to keep in mind is although that it says 7 referrals to CIC's DBBI, which is this dark blue color right here, 5 and 2. These are including successful referrals and unsuccessful referrals. So this could be the referrals were made, but then by the time that they were able to make contact with that client, they had already been housed or otherwise resolved their housing situation, etc.
And what is the DDPI?
That is the Domestic Violence Bonus Initiative with Community Action Council and Greenhouse 17. Are there any other questions? I was moving along, but I didn't stop to ask. So reviewing by project type, most were rapid rehousing. That is because of those referrals to Community Action Council's Domestic Violence Bonus Initiative Rapid Rehousing Project, as well as Mountain Comprehensive Care Center's COC-funded Rapid Rehousing Project. Looking at last quarter, it was flip-flopped where we had more permanent supportive housing versus rapid rehousing, in part because of Lexington Housing Authority Shelter Plus Care needing 10 referrals at one time. But because most of the time our rapid rehousing clients, they do have that specific time limit, we tend to find that typically it does look more like this, where there's more rapid rehousing versus permanent supportive housing referrals that are needed. So looking at project type, this is rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, and these are the months, July, August, September. You can see that the referrals that were made, the 3 referrals that were made in September were for permanent supportive housing versus our rapid rehousing, which were earlier in the quarter. Also looking at acuity, once again, this is based upon rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. You can see the VSPDAT scores here. You'll see a 35, that is because a full spit out was completed for an individual. I excluded that 35 in these averages because it's not a tool that can be easily comparable one-to-one. And you'll also see that there's not, some numbers may be missing here, and that is because we simply did not have any referrals for those individuals. For rapid rehousing, that average VSPDAT score was 6.4, and the average score for permanent supportive housing was 11. In terms of household compositions, this probably sounds really familiar to most folks in this room, but the majority were individuals. 72% were individuals, 12% were referrals for households. So this would include several members within the household, but nobody under the age of 18. And 16% were families. This is families, households, individuals, and the difference between permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing. The only thing that I would say about this is that because a lot of our programs, we find that when they first make a project application, they indicate that they'll serve families, but then when it comes time for the referrals, we as a housing triage provider, I have to ask, is this for a family or an individual? Because we also find that our providers have difficulty making sure that they're, actually housing families, and part of that is because there's less families in our system, and also because we have to explicitly ask and make sure that we are making sure that we're housing families if it's needed. So our goal is to design a system that reacts quickly, so that's within 30 days of presentation. And the average length of time for coordinated entry for this quarter was 285 days, so a lot over that 30-day mark. Last quarter it was 202 days, and the primary reason for that was, we have several that were 700, 800, 900, and one that was over 1,000 days on our by name list. However, you can see the majority is within that 200-day mark, which makes sense that it's probably around that average of 200 days. Something that I would like to point out is that you'll see that most of these are this kind of darkish blue color, which indicates Mountain Comprehensive Care Center, COC Rapid Rehousing Project. We are moving further down within our prioritization, but still within the same acuity score. So now we find that we're housing our folks that have been on the list a lot longer, but maybe not necessarily do not have other vulnerability criteria that would make them higher prioritized, for example. So now that we're very rapidly going through our 7s, for example, you can see how many people that we referred that scored a 7. Now we find that we're referring individuals that have been on the list quite a bit longer. And this is just separating it out. These again are the days between coordinated entry, enrollment, and referral by PSH and rapid rehousing. Again, to my point earlier, we often think that our permanent supportive housing folks are going to be on the list longer. They have to meet the definition of chronic homelessness in order to even be eligible. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they've been on coordinated entry longer. And also because we're working through our rapid rehousing folks.
Which one's the dark blue?
Yeah, the dark blue is
No, the royal blue.
dark blue.
Yeah.
Like the UK colored blue
Yes.
is the DVBI, so that's the Domestic Violence Bonus Initiative. And we find that those ones do quickly quickly referred because there's a specific project that we can make that referral for. They're included in our by name list, in its entirety, but our by name list has like over 500 people on it. So even though they're included in their, on our entire by name list, so they are eligible for other programs because we find that the Domestic Violence Bonus Initiative program tends to move quickly. Those folks get referred most often there versus having to wait with the other 500 folks that are waiting for a referral. And then lastly, I also wanted to talk about the numbers of days between coordinated entry, enrollment, and referral for specific VSPDAT scores. Once again, down at the bottom, these are the days between coordinated entry, enrollment, and referral, and the VSPDAT scores are here along the left-hand side. So for example, 7 kind of runs the gamut between 0 to 30 days, all the way to over 1,000 days. But it doesn't necessarily mean that if somebody has a higher VSPDAT score, that they're going to have to wait a longer time for a referral. Again, we find that most of them do happen within that 200 to 300 day mark. So definitely far exceeding our 30-day goal, unfortunately. This is not all the information that was in the report, but I felt like these were some of the high points and what we think about when we think about the by name list. How long does it actually take? Because then the process from referral into project entry tends to be about 10-ish days to gather all that documentation, conduct that intake, make sure that we're adding them into the project within HMIS. And then the other measure is how quickly are we moving them into housing from project entry, which is something that I know we discuss a lot. It's one of our system performance measures, but I feel like we often don't get information about the specific by name list and what that weight actually looks like. So I wanted to pull it up here. Any questions, comments, concerns?
Can you include the link to the presentation in the minutes?
Yeah, it is difficult because it would be a static presentation, which I'm happy to do so. Like when I hover over them, it will
Right.
it will tell me more information about it. Is it successful or not? This one is pending. The actual specific number of days, the date of rejection or acceptance, it's still pending, so that's left blank, for example. So that specifically, we would have to export and publish it, and it's difficult to determine where that information should be, but I think that all of this information should be included within our website, but I'm happy to do the static presentation as well.
Sure.
So it's slightly less information, but.
Yeah. Sure.
Anything else? The only other thing that I would say is, as we kind of think about, we're entering, obviously now we're in the last quarter of the calendar year, thinking about how our coordinated entry system has moved and operated across the entire year and what that flow looks like. So probably at our next meeting, it's going to be a much more detailed explanation looking at both at the year to that point and to December, as a way to hopefully determine ways that we could decrease that number and have it meet more of that 30-day mark. I also include information about like how many folks are being added to our coordinated entry project over the course of the year versus how many folks are being exited from our coordinated entry project over the course of the year, and where those exits are to. I'm going to guess that most of the exits are probably done by myself, which is during our coordinated entry housing triage meetings. We ask, has anybody seen this individual? Their last entry exit was this state, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're not within our system. But if it's been over some time, our official number in our policies and procedure is 90 days. But often if it's somebody who we have pretty consistent communication with, we try to make sure that we leave them on, so that way if they are next to receive a referral, we can notify them once we're able to. So be expecting that. The other thing that I would like for us to think of regarding coordinated entry, and as we think about the entirety of the year, is we've created equity factors to try and house those who are especially vulnerable. Things such as, are they actively fleeing domestic violence? Things like, where are they currently sleeping? Is it in an encampment, unsheltered, or potentially like in their car, for example, and using that as a measure of vulnerability. And we want to determine how well we're doing in promoting equity factors, and also making sure that those who are most vulnerable are actually receiving the most timely referral as well. I also am interested to break down our entire coordinated entry information by race and ethnicity as well, to determine how many folks are actually on the list, receiving referrals, and then moved into a project, and then potentially moved into housing, to see if there's any inequitable elements that are happening within there. And then last thing that I want to talk about regarding our housing triage system is those policies and procedures are on our website within our resources for partners page. I'm happy to demonstrate and show where that is. No. For partners, and then our resources for partners, and then if you scroll down, you'll see our housing triage system and our policies and procedures. The only other thing that I would say is in thinking about ways to encourage equity, how can we potentially reshape these questions to actually maybe even get to where we need to be, making sure that if we're asking questions, we're asking the right questions. You know, for example, instead of just asking, you know, how many encounters have you had with police, maybe the better question is potentially like, how many times have you experienced harm and felt unable to go to police because of, you know, an identity, race, ethnicity, domestic violence survivor, etc. Maybe a better way of phrasing those questions and actually getting to the information that we want, which is how vulnerable is this individual when they are unsheltered.
You might have answered this in previous ones, but those folks that are like 1,000 days, is there some way to handle that so it doesn't skew the data so much, but yet, I'm not saying we should lob them off and not help them, but it doesn't seem to be, you know, an accurate depiction of what most experiences it within that 200 days. So
Yeah.
is there a way to mitigate that a little bit?
We certainly can within like this data set. Like, for example, looking at, you know, if there's 3 folks that are 700 days or more, but the rest of the 22 folks are within that 200 days, providing both numbers, both information. I think that's a really good point to potentially bring to our coordinated entry by name list as a whole examination at our next meeting, and potentially think of, okay, if only 5% of our by name list is 700 days or more, what does that average of that number total, including and then excluding maybe that 5% as a better representation of the average length of time that it takes.
I would think so, because if you're evaluating response and obstacles to that, if you're saying that the average is, I'm making this up, 500 days or something, but truly, for most people, it's not, then you kind of have 2 different things you're looking at. You know, how can we get this 200 days and under better? And then what's going on with these 3 folks over here that 1,000 days, where if we were just lumping it all up and go, the average is 500, then I don't know if we get at the root of what's happening with most of our folks.
Yeah, and I can't say for certain that this is happening with like some of our folks who were those, you know, 700, 800, 1,000 day plus, but I know just in going into our HMIS system and looking at this, you'll have somebody who was potentially like placed onto coordinated entry, enrolled into the coordinated entry project maybe 2 years ago, but they were never exited. They probably entered into a housing situation where they were no longer eligible for coordinated entry, or they had resolved themselves, but they were never exited from the coordinated entry list. And then when a housing crisis brought them back to a situation where they re-entered into our homelessness system. So we have a gap, but you know, from like 2021, potentially there was a gap in 2022, but now in 2023, they're back within our system. It's really difficult to determine and to ask, right, and to ask,
Our people was that way.
when did that homelessness occurrence stop? And then when did it start back? One of those questions is, when did this occurrence of homelessness begin? But it's really difficult within the coordinated entry project, besides asking and then putting an exit date, backdating, putting a new start date, and then starting forward. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Besides the obvious that it's a pretty lengthy time to absolve a housing crisis. I usually tell folks, if somebody asks about how long does it take, I tend to tell them about 200 days, because it seems as though that's when the majority we make a referral for, but I tell them that's obviously not a guarantee, and we have some folks that have been on there for a greater length of time, especially if they are not, if they score low within a range.
Mostly because there's no housing available.
Yes, I think part of it is just my personal opinion in talking with folks and also operating the by name list. Is I think that it probably is folks are staying on longer because the resources where folks potentially could resolve themselves are very limiting. And so SSDI or SSI check is not going as far. So they can't just move into housing and move off the by name list because they're moving into housing through another resource. Instead, they're having to continue to reside on the by name list for that resource. And it's obviously a very scarce resource. Anything else? Okay. I'm gonna unplug this. Okay, great. Like I didn't want it to go to the Apple TV menu or the other menu, but I will move on. Sorry, I'm chatting a lot. I will move on to HMIS training and announcements. Our user trainings, new user trainings that are happening soon are on October 12th and then November 9th. I apologize, there should be a correction to these, and it is 9 a.m. to 12 o'clock. This is to allow for a rest period and like a 5 to 10-ish minute grace period in between that time to actually stretch, because I understand that that's a pretty lengthy time to stretch, move around, etc., and then come back and stay engaged rather than having to power through and then be exhausted by the 11:30. So those are 9 to 12. Those are the next two trainings. Sorry? October 12th and November 9th are the next two HMIS trainings. And then the other specific date that I want to provide is November 14th for an end user group meeting that lasts typically about an hour. It is always recorded, and I always distribute that to our HMIS users thereafter, so that way they can receive the information and material for that as well. The other thing that I would like to talk about within HMIS announcements is that it is now past October 1st. So our fiscal year 24 data standards are now in effect. But I have noticed some bugs within our HMIS system. I'm sure that we will continue to notice some things that are not quite right. While Sky, our HMIS vendor, is currently working to absolve and hopefully resolve those pretty timely and quickly. If you find any issues, to our HMIS providers, if you find any issues while working in the system, please feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to let Sky know. I think like just the past 2 evenings, I've actually received an update report saying that they're continuing to release changes. The other things that I would like to talk about is the paper copies of intake, interim updates, and exit paperwork for our projects that correspond to our HMIS assessments within our system are expected to be completed by end of week this week. So those will all be on our resources for partners page. I guess I could have left it plugged in and showed you where that was, but it's at the very bottom on our resources for partners page. So we're just asking that you provide a little bit of grace and allow us to the week to make sure that that is all complete. As those are completed, I will make sure that they're uploaded continually. Like for example, the coordinated entry assessment is already up there. Intake and update. Any questions about that? Okay. Then moving on to other issues of public sharing, I'm going to hope that somebody has another issue or public sharing, so it's not just me talking throughout this whole meeting.
I'll talk.
Okay.
So, as many of you have heard from me, City Council is considering a ban on source of income discrimination, and they are receiving a presentation from Commissioner Lanter on that next Tuesday. And the COC has sent, Diane sent the letter to the council members last Friday. And we have also, there's been a group of service providers who have talked about setting up some meetings with some council members for next week and the week after, in order just to give council members more of the service provider perspective on this. And so if anyone who has not been in the loop on that is interested in talking to any of the council members, please let me know. And we can get you looped into scheduling. And there's also going to be a public facing event where service providers will talk about source of income discrimination on Monday, October 16th. So that's in about 2 weeks. And it's before the work session where City Council will hopefully be considering it, depending on how the committee meeting goes next Tuesday. So, and if anyone's interested in participating in that, also please do let me know. So, but yeah, we've been talking about source of income discrimination for a year, and council's going to finally be considering it and talking about it starting next week. So I'm excited for that and really grateful for the ways that everybody's shown up in support of it.
How are you feeling about it, Bo? Do you think it has much of a chance, or are you just glad that the discussion's actually being lifted up a little bit, highlighted, and what do you think?
I feel some uncertainty
Yeah.
because I know that council members have also received a lot of feedback from some landlord associations opposing it. And I know, so there's been some council members who are trying to walk the line, but I'm curious to see how they'll react to the presentation next Tuesday. I know Commissioner Landry submitted his presentation today, and so he has it prepared, and he included the COC's letter, or at least a reference to the COC's letter in his presentation. So I feel curious. There are some council members who are all fully in support, and some who I don't expect to support, but then I think there's a larger chunk in the middle that I don't have a read on. Yeah.
You've done a lot of work. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything else? Okay, then our next meeting is December 6th. That will be 1:30. That will be here. I don't think it will go quite as quickly as this one. I guess we can only hope. And can we adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, great.
To adjourn.
2:06. Wonderful. All right, thank you all.
Thanks, sweetie.